Hi everyone and welcome to this new tutorial. Today we are going to see how to implement a HTTP server using Qt. Before we start with the code, let's have a brief look about the web application architecture. So in the beginning we have a web browser, can be Chrome, Mozilla Firefox or Safari, which send a HTTP request to a web server through internet. The web server receives that request, process the request, and send the response to the web browser, and the web browser finally display the web page or the HTML page. As an example, we have a URL www.example.com. So when this URL is entered inside the browser fetches the index.html file from a web server in order to display that page. And all this process works according to the HTTP protocol. So the web browser establishes a TCP/IP connection to the website and therefore send a GET request along the connection, and finally read the response from the connection coming from a server. Here as an example, we can see a simple HTTP request which is composed from the header and the body. So for example, in this case, we'll be focusing on the get method. Now let's start with our coding part. First of all, let's create a new project called HTTP server. And we'll rename the class to HTTP server. We use a simple Q widget. Now let's select our kits in GW64. All right. Let's add the network module and also inside our header we'll include the network module, include Qt network, and also the Qt core module, because we're using the class QGBurg to write to the console. Now let's create a TCP server called HTTP server and a TCP socket called web client. Okay, we'll start with the TCP server. Let's start the server. If HTTP server, listen. And we use the port HE, which is the default port for the HTTP protocol. If the server doesn't start, On the port 80, we can write a message to the console. HTTP server not started. All right. So we have just created and started our server. Okay, we can allow the access to the server. Also, let's create some private slots when there is a new connection. Incoming connection. When there is data available. Okay, I think these two might be enough. And okay, in our UI file, we'll add a text browser that we call message box. Message box. Message box will be responsible for displaying all the response that the server receives. Let's make some connections. Connect HTTP server. New connection. When there is a new connection, incoming connection. Moreover, let's make another connection. No, that other slot we will use when there is incoming connection. All right. So there is an incoming connection. We can use UI message box. Append. New client trying to connect. And then web client equals HTTP server next pending connection. And then we can connect. We can so you see we receive message new client trying to connect. Now let's connect our web client to the event when data is present. Okay, so what do we do when the data is present? We'll first of all try to pass the request. Web client, read all, and then we will display that request. Okay, let's see. No, we have to remove the HTTPS part. Okay. So here we are. This is our request, HTTP request that we receive from the server. Now we need to respond to that request. If you observe well, each line of the request is for a different keyword. So the first line for our request is the method. So we have our get method. Now let's respond to that request. We'll write is a simple HTML code. Hello world. And then we'll write it to the web client. Okay, let's try again. Okay, this is our hello world, our first HTML page that we have hosted through our server. We can change the HTML code to an to a more advanced one. Okay, you can remove all the meta. All right, let's try with this one. Okay, we have our first HTML page. Okay guys, this was a simple tutorial about how to create a web server using Qt. It's the same method that famous software like WAMP server use to host page in the local network. To extend this project, you can try to load more complicated HTML pages with images, audio, and also video, and try to handle downloads with this HTTP server. Thanks.